This video marks a momentous occasion for False Swipe Gaming, as today we're covering a Generation 7 Pokemon for the first time with the one and only Decidueye. The final stage of Alola's grass starter Pokemon, the adorable Rowlet, who's also going to be a starter in the upcoming Pokemon Legends Arceus, Decidueye is unique in many regards. It was the first and remains the only starter with partial ghost typing, and in a similar vein, it has different secondary typing from its pre-evolution, the partial flying type Dartrix. Decidueye also arguably possesses the most difficult name to spell among all starter Pokemon. Finally, it of course has a rich history behind its inspiration and design, as it is not just based on an owl, but several kinds, most notably the Pueo owl, a common physical form of the Aumakua or ancestral spirits in Hawaiian culture, but also the common barn owl, which is sometimes known as the ghost owl. Today we'll be examining if Decidueye was able to strike the fear of death into the hearts of the competitive scene, as the owls it's based on have done to humans throughout history. And so, we ask, how good was Decidueye actually? And in this video, we'll be going over these competitive formats. Despite Decidueye's high attack, great stab combination, and Swords Dance, it had too many flaws to establish itself as an OU contender. Its bulk and speed were nothing to write home about, and it offered just about no defensive utility for its team against the high-powered OU metagame. Given the stiffness of its grass-type competition, most notably the highly splashable, consistent performances of its most direct competitor in Tapu Bulu, Decidueye didn't have much of a shot. That said, in the early, less established stages of Sun and Moon, pretty much everything was tried out in OU, and that included Decidueye, however briefly. And flawed though it was, it did have its good points too, and was once even seen as a one-off choice in tournament play. Its stab combination was nearly impossible to resist, and its stab Spirit Shackle was particularly vicious when powered up by Deciduum Z into its signature Z move, Sinister Arrow Raid. Having stab on its Z move allowed it to easily break through popular walls like Celesteela and Skarmory after Swords Dance, which Tapu Bulu struggled to do. Furthermore, being able to hit pretty much everything it needed to in just its stab moves was another advantage Decidueye had. Whereas Bulu had to make the choice between Stone Edge's coverage against flying types and Volcarona versus the benefits of Substitute or Protect, Decidueye already hit those flyers and Volcarona with its Ghost Stab, making it free to run Substitute to avoid status and ease prediction without drawback. Finally, Decidueye's Ghost typing meant it could freely switch out of Dugtrio's Arena Trap. This may not seem like such a big deal until one considers how stall teams would use Dugtrio to force the Toxic on an otherwise threatening Swords Dance Tapu Bulu. Decidueye didn't have this problem, and its ability to freely switch in and out of to batter stall, as well as its effortlessness in beating Skarmory, that was another advantage over Bulu, was quite valuable given stall's popularity and dominance in the metagame's early stages. Of course, this was the smallest, briefest of niches, given that Tapu Bulu was a much better Pokemon overall. But early on, Decidueye did prove that it could rip through the OU playstyle many considered broken. Once Gen 7's lower tiers were established, Decidueye dropped down and made its home among them. There it was theorized to be able to take on a number of roles. Its Swords Dance set was first on the list, of course, especially since it had access to a great priority move in Sucker Punch to somewhat compensate for its middling speed, but it could also potentially run an effective Nasty Plot set. Both these setup moves also lent themselves to dangerous potential Baton Pass antics. Finally, Decidueye could even run two variants of Defog support, either defensive in the vein of a traditionally bulky grass type since it had great recovery and roost, or offensive with its natural immediate threat presence, still being threatening while having the option to further support its team with hazard removal. Both variants were also great for momentum purposes thanks to U-Turn. However, though it had potential, Decidueye didn't really fit into early UU, especially since Baton Pass was removed. Though it wasn't an outright bad Pokemon, the metagame's overall stats were still too high for it, and thus it didn't really do anything to stand out on the few occasions it was used. It was great at ripping through bulky stall teams thanks to its great stabs in conjunction with the havoc wreaked by Spirit Shackle's trapping abilities, but it was more or less dead weight against offensive teams, and even its stall breaking niche didn't last, as Stall evolved to handle it by running Pokemon like Unaware Clefable and Mega Aerodactyl. Another problem Decidueye had was competition with another grass ghost type, Delmise, who packed a huge attack stat, a third stab thanks to its Steel Worker ability, and could also clear the field of hazards with Rapid Spin without getting rid of its own team's hazards or being blocked by Taunt. And Delmise wasn't exactly a terrific UU Pokemon either. It took a while, but Decidueye eventually dropped to RU. There, it established itself as an excellent excellent choice as it turned out to be perfect in the lower power level of RU. It still mostly excelled against balanced and stall teams, which it absolutely terrorized, but it was useful against offense too. Decidueye's primary set was Source Dance, which let its sinister arrow raid rip through the tier's common walls like Registeel, and had plenty of variety to it thanks to the freedom it had in choosing its last move. Substitute was plenty common, but it could also destroy would-be revenge killers like Salazzle with a boosted Sucker Punch. It could remain healthy throughout a game against bulky, passive teams with Roost, or it could lure the immensely popular Chestnut with Brave Bird. Furthermore, though it usually used Decidueye Z, it could easily take advantage of an opponent expecting that, since it had a powerful secondary Grass Stab. And Umbreon or Porygon 2, thinking they were safe against Sinister Arrow Raid, would find themselves absolutely crushed by a +2 Bloom Doom. Then Ultra Sun and Moon came around and gifted Decidueye two great moves, Shadow Sneak and Leaf Storm, with the former being a solid, more reliable priority move for Swords Dance sets, and the latter being especially notable for its huge power having the potential to vault Nasty Plot sets into similar viability to that of Swords Dance. It also was able to use its unique hidden ability, Long Reach, which prevented its contact moves from making contact. As such, it could use them without fear of contact punishing items and abilities such as Rocky Helmet and Static. However, while it did bring this gift, Ultra Sun and Moon also brought power creep, which was not good for Decidueye, seeing as it had already exhibited plenty of problems in the high power metagames. Mandibuzz dropping into the tier was particularly brutal for it. Sure, Decidueye could try to lure it with sets like Subtoxic or Swords Dance Giga Impact into Breakneck Blitz, especially since the former set had great synergy with Spirit Shackle's trapping capabilities, but those sets would make Decidueye far worse against the rest of the metagame. It quickly became overshadowed. Serena was an excellent, more consistent offensive grass type with great utility in Rapid Spin and U-Turn, while Feraligatr and Virizion proved themselves as the tier's premier Swords Dance users. Players tried to experiment with other Decidueye sets, but they were unable to breathe any life into it. Thus, Decidueye usage dropped, and it eventually found itself in NU, where it was revitalized. Now, it did have the notable problem of once again directly competing with Dhelmise, which was an excellent Pokemon. However, Decidueye made the most of its unique tools to differentiate itself. By using special attacks, it was a more effective switch to water types like Vaporeon and Blastoise, being significantly less hampered by potential Scald Burns. Being able to switch into Blastoise was particularly valuable given Decidueye's Ghost typing allowed it to act as a Rapid Spin blocker, thus protecting its team's hazard and making it a great fit on spike stacking builds. Spin blocking wasn't a niche Decidueye utilized often, given the prominence of Defog, but it was quite effective in this context, especially as it was not just used to block spin, it was a fierce threat in its own right. Decidueye's primary set was the Nasty Plot variant, which blasted enormous holes in teams with boosted Leaf Storms and Shadow Balls, both of which could be boosted with Z Crystals, making it unpredictable as well as powerful, all while reliably remaining unhealthy with Roost. A +2 Leaf Storm powered up with Gracium Z into Bloom Doom was so strong that even a resist as bulky as defensive Incineroar had to be at high health, lest it get blown away, and it had to be defensive to even stand a chance, because offensive variants got absolutely crushed, even potentially being one-hit KO from absolute full health. Plus, most grass resists such as Weezing and Vikavolt got hammered by a boosted Shadow Ball anyway, and the opposite was true if Decidueye decided to go with Ghostium Z instead. The Swords Dancer wasn't bad, but special attacks were really what made Decidueye as good as it was. As such, it makes sense that the main sets that began seeing use as alternatives to Nasty Plot were its defensive and offensive Defog variants, which used special Grass Stab as well. These sets packed a great deal of field utility in Defog and U-Turn, as well as defensive utility in being able to stomach Passimian, with Colbur Berry stifling the would-be threat of knockoff. Colbur was also valuable for staving off Pursuit. It wasn't a permanent answer, but was critical in helping give the Decidueye users some play against it. Additionally, offensive Defog variants could have a similar anti-knockoff effect, while making themselves more threatening through Gracium Z. Decidueye was able to fit on a variety of teams and consistently perform effectively, allowing it to finish the 7th generation off as a solid NU Pokemon. And to finish things off, Decidueye was briefly seen as a stall breaker in UU once again, as stall had completely taken over the metagame, and with no more unaware Clefable around, Decidueye's brutal Swords Dance set tore through such teams with ease. As such, it was careful in preserving its health for Mega Aerodactyl. It was specific, but effective in that small niche, and thus capped off a successful debut generation for itself, seeing at least some degree of effective use in 3 tiers, 4 if you count its briefest of possible stints in OU. Generation 8's lower power level with the Pokedex reduction as well as the removal of Z moves, Megas, Hidden Power, and Pursuit was highly beneficial for Decidueye, at least if it would be able to get over not being able to use Z moves itself. Sadly, it still wasn't able to truly break into UU. It was theorized to be able to do so at the beginning of the tier's existence, but it wasn't able to establish itself as a true part of the metagame, as it did not offer much in the way of utility on both offense and defense. Its stats were generally just not enough to keep up with its competitors. Fortunately, Decidueye was able to find a place in RU again, right from the tier's onset. As always, the Swords Dance set was the first thing on most players' minds, and it was decent, but once again, it struggled to differentiate itself from the generally superior physical grass ghost, Dhelmise. However, in another repeat, Dhelmise did differentiate itself from the Anchor through its unique capability of special attacks, except this time around, it took that concept a step further. What really launched Decidueye's status as a genuinely good Pokemon was the discovery of the Choice Specs set, whose powerful Leaf Storms and Shadow Ball were incredibly spammable and ripped through much of the metagame. As always, the two moves' coverage complemented each other beautifully, covering each other's resists. Decidueye got plenty of switch-in opportunities thanks to solid natural bulk and typing, as well as stab moves that hit many Pokemon super effectively. From there, the huge instant power of Choice Specs made it immensely tough to switch into, as neutral targets were destroyed and resists weren't necessarily safe either. For example, even the likes of Silvally Steel, by no means a fragile Pokemon, took heavy damage from Leaf Storm. Furthermore, Generation 8 had gifted Decidueye an incredible coverage move in Hurricane, increasing the amount of Pokemon it could instantly blast apart. For example, Vileplume no longer dared switch in against it. Plus, the Specs set always had the option of playing it safe against any switch in and keeping momentum through U-turn. Of course, great as the Specs set was, Decidueye wasn't beholden to running it. With a bulky utility set, it had the invaluable quality of acting as a reliable Virizion counter, while also supporting its team through the fog. Some players even enjoyed switching things up with Choice Band Decidueye or using a Scarf set as a late game cleaner. While all of this was happening, though Decidueye was a genuinely solid RU Pokemon, it didn't quite have the usage to be considered RU proper, and thus it dropped to NU. And wouldn't you know it, it was great there too. Its journey through the early stages of NU ought to be familiar by now. It started off with Swords Dance but quickly branched off into using special sets, including the Choice Specs variant that had been such a hit in RU, as well as its tried and true the Fog variant, establishing itself as an effective, varied all-around Pokemon once again. Then the Isle of Armor came around and gifted Decidueye an absolutely incredible move in the massively powerful Ghost Stab Poltergeist. The expanded Pokedex and its resultant power creep meant Decidueye took a bit of a backseat in RU, but suddenly its Swords Dance and Choice Band sets were among the most feared Pokemon in NU. Choice Band was particularly vicious for how instantly threatening it made Decidueye, especially since the item also synergized beautifully with U-turn and Shadow Sneak. Banded Poltergeist was incredibly strong, ripping through nearly the whole tier, while the few Pokemon that could withstand it were slashed open by Banded Leaf Blade. With this Poltergeist Leaf Blade combo, Decidueye was basically the scariest slasher villain imaginable, equal parts spectral and corporeal, which is fitting as it was so feared by the player base that it was almost instantly put up for a vote on whether or not it should be banned alongside other terrors in Gallade and Toxicroak. Decidueye just barely avoided the ban hammer and continued to make things go up in NU's nights, leaving opponents both physically and psychologically destroyed. Even more fitting with this theme was that one couldn't even punish Decidueye's use of contact moves thanks to long reach. It could freely spam them without fearing Rocky Helmet's or Vileplume's effect score. What made Decidueye even more terrifying was that, as powerful, effective, and daunting to switch into as physical sets were, the fact was that it could just as easily use its special sets, which hadn't missed a beat in terms of effectiveness. If anything, they had been given an indirect buff by virtue of no longer being expected, resulting in being gifted prime targets and physically bulky Pokemon easily shattered by a Leaf Storm. The only thing that could really switch safely into Specs Decidueye was Sap Sipper Miltank, as it was immune to both stab moves and didn't really fear Hurricane. As such, balanced teams were just about required to run Miltank if they didn't want to get torn apart. It spoke to the immense power Decidueye had that a popular team style pretty much required one specific Pokemon to answer it. Furthermore, Scarf Decidueye was another generally solid set, often vaulted into excellence by virtue of how unexpected it was. While Decidueye was scaring the soul out of NU, it was also making a comeback in RU. Scarf sets became particularly popular as they were valuable in dealing with the massively irritating Sigilith and generally effective at checking opposing Pokemon, making them solid for both revenge killers and late game cleaning. The momentum maintaining capabilities of U-turn made it particularly good at taking advantage of the opportunities presented by its revenge killing duties. Though initially slept on at the beginning of the Isle of Armor, the Specs and Band sets returned with a vengeance and quickly began tearing through everything as well. As such, Decidueye eventually moved up to RU by usage. Funnily enough, this was likely the only reason reason it wasn't outright banned from NU. Given how badly it was destroying that tier, the player base was leaning towards getting rid of it. Then the Crown Tundra came around, bringing with it another Pokedex expansion that put a dent in Decidueye's viability. The player base forgot it in favor of the new RU grass type Decidueye, which sent Decidueye tumbling down to NU again. In the chaotic early stages of this fast-paced new metagame, characterized by high-powered boosting sweepers like Shell Smash, Poltegeist, and Caracosta, supported by dual screens from Inteleon, Decidueye followed suit with its Swords Dance set. When it wasn't doing that, it adopted a fully specially defensive set, letting it act as one of the tier's few Pokemon that could at all stave off Toxtricity. Eventually, Barbarcool was banned, putting a massive dent in the viability of screen teams, and Decidueye's role shifted once again. In the wake of the Barbarcool ban, Cresselia became especially prominent, and Decidueye absolutely loved being able to threaten Crest with its powerful super effective Ghost Stab that plowed through much of the rest of the tier as well. Its Swords Dance set remained dangerous, but Choice Specs reared its head once again and began blasting through the entire tier. Just as it had before, as did the Choice Band sets that began seeing use not long after, only Guzzlord and Braviary could really stave it off. Eventually, Cresselia was banned for its overbearing presence and influence on the metagame, and with Guzzlord and Braviary increasing in usage as they were discovered to be great Pokemon in their own right, Decidueye took a hit. It was still a solid Pokemon, just not the nigh unstoppable menace it had been for so long. Plus, in addition to being immensely threatening against any team that didn't have Guzzlord or Braviary, the fact that it forced them in could be exploited thanks to U-Turn, as long as the Decidueye user was smart and paired it with a Pokemon that enjoyed getting free turns against them, such as Glastrier. Around this time, Decidueye was rediscovered in RU. Its Choice Band set was able to separate itself from its main competitor, Banded Golurk, thanks to its ability to check boosted Poltegeist with Shadow Sneak. Its typing was also helpful in staving off Xurkitree, and as always, it packed the ever-spammable U-Turn. It also enjoyed Decidueye rising to UU, as well as the prominence of Reuniclus to beat up on. And that brings us to our conclusion. In the present day, it's gone through ups and downs, but with its variety of effective sets, Decidueye has a solid niche in RU and remains one of NU's premier threats, marking a second successful generation for itself. And that's it. So how good was Decidueye actually? Well, it's only been in 2 generations, but it's already established itself as an excellent lower tier Pokemon through its achievements in RU and NU. It ascended to a new level upon receiving Poltergeist in the Isle of Armor, mixing its previously devastating Choice Spec set with the vicious power of Choice Band. It was almost instantly banned from NU and was well on its way to being voted on a second time, which would have surely resulted in its ban had it not risen back to RU. So all in all, Decidueye has been a great Pokemon in its short competitive career thus far and shows no signs of slowing down. Thanks for watching, everyone, and as always, if you liked the video and you want to see more, be sure to subscribe to False Swipe Gaming for more weekly Pokemon content. And in the comments, I want to know, what do you think about competitive Decidueye? Are you gonna pick Rowlet for Pokemon Legends Arceus? Whatever it is, let me know in the comments. Also, thank you so much to our patrons for continued support of our videos, and thank you to everyone else watching as well. And follow my crew on these social media platforms. And that's all I got. See you next time, everyone.